colleagues. I think this is a great day for TB control. And here we have the hope to give our efforts further push forward and really advance towards control of this global scourge and its most feared recent variant that we call M and XDR-TB. If I can have the first slide, please. Right, so I would like to define for you, just to remind everyone, what we mean for multidrug resistant TB and XDR-TB. So multidrug resistant TB is the form of tuberculosis that is caused by the bacilli that are resistant to the two most important drugs, isoniazid and rifampicin. When multidrug resistant TB is also associated with resistance to the most important second-line reserve drugs, i.e. the fluoroquinolones and the injectables, we call it XDR-TB. The next slide, please. Now, this slide is what came out of the partners forum, the Stop TB Partnership forums last week in Rio de Janeiro, where we presented the latest information on the TB situation. And you see in the first row there that we estimate today more than 9 million cases of TB occurring every year. We estimate more than 1.7 million deaths due to tuberculosis, which if you can count is 5,500 deaths every day. And we estimate more than 500,000 cases of multidrug resistant TB, perhaps a third of them fatal. We estimate, and this is really an estimate, the previous ones are based on empirical data, but this one is an estimate because we don't have enough information at the moment, that perhaps 10% of these multidrug resistant TB cases are now XDR-TB already, 50,000 a year perhaps. And probably, since they are not recognized in the vast majority of countries, almost entirely lethal. Finally, and this was the new thing of last week, more than 1.4 million cases of TB, of those 9 million are related or associated with HIV. This doubles the estimate we were making until a year ago, thanks to much better information that we have now from Africa, that is testing more systematically every TB patient for HIV. And you see nearly 500,000 of the deaths of TB today associated with HIV. The next slide. So this shows the two fundamental policy documents that we are using today in the world of TB. On the left, you have the Stop TB strategy, which begins with the pursuit of proper DOTS implementation, and if you put it in this context, to protect against MDR-TB really, to prevent it, as well as to take care of the cases of TB. And in the second point of the strategy, we also explicitly insist on the need to address the big risks of today, which include obviously MDR-TB. The document on the right is the Stop TB Partnership Global Plan to Stop TB 2006-2015, which defines the strategic direction of all partners, and it defines the cost of control of tuberculosis in the decade. And you see that the cost is about $60 billion. And mind you that more than 80% of this cost are to be borne by the developing countries and the endemic countries. It's not what the international community is supposed to put. And $11 billion are for the innovations that we were just talking about, the research component. Now let's focus down on the issue of today. This is the big challenge. 500,000 or more MDR-TB cases, as I mentioned. XDR-TB, which is probably 50,000 cases a year, and now present in at least 55 countries around the world. Every country that tests for it finds it, basically. More than, rather, 5% of MDR-TB cases today receiving treatment, and only about 3% of these estimated 500,000 receiving treatment under proper international standards compatible with what the World Health Organization and the international partners are saying today. About 85% of this global incidence of MDR-TB is present in the countries that you are representing here. And that's why we have convened you. And finally, as our Director General mentioned, the linkage with HIV is largely unknown in the African continent, simply because the African continent does not have capacity at the moment, in laboratory terms particularly, to understand better what the situation is. And this has been called a week ago by the Minister of Health of Tanzania in Rio de Janeiro a potentially explosive situation. Next slide. Just a few maps of the world. These are the estimated numbers of MDR-TB cases. And you clearly see there in red China and India that have about 100,000 cases, we estimate, of MDR-TB every year. You see in orange the Russian Federation with probably more than 40,000 cases every year. And you see in lighter orange Kazakhstan, Nigeria, South Africa, Pakistan, Indonesia that have probably between 10 and 40,000 cases every year. The next slide shows the percentages. How many of the new cases of tuberculosis are today multi-drug resistant? And you have there the former Soviet Union countries, most of them with at least 10% of their new cases being multi-drug resistant TB, which means in some situation 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10 cases, new cases appear into the system already infected with MDR-TB. And then you see China in yellow there, which means between 3 and 6%. The next slide. And this is the latest information we have on XDR-TB. These are the countries that have officially notified to the World Health Organization at least one case of XDR-TB. They are 54 plus China, Hong Kong. So that means 55 if you like. And I'm pretty sure that once Africa starts testing, you see Africa is in gray, not because they don't have cases, but because we don't know if they have cases. And where the capacity exists, in South Africa particularly, and in the countries around South Africa, then XDR-TB has been detected.